Well, welcome everyone to the GAMSAT 101 Masterclass this morning, specifically for first-time sitters, but I also know there are some re-sitters in here, which is pretty cool. Thank you so much for joining us across the world, especially for those who are live coming in from places like the UK and Scotland right now. I find that crazy. Respect to you for that level of dedication. I just wanted to go through quickly a quick intro before I hand over to Sarah and we'll get started on the content of the masterclass. Cool. Oh, this never works when I press the next button. So since we'll be spending, I guess, the next quick 2 hours together, I'll just do a little quick intro of Hallett if you haven't heard of us before. If you haven't heard of us before, can you just give us an indication and write a thumbs up in the chat? That will give us a good indication of sort of who's who. But very much Hallett is actually a non-for-profit. We're not a GAMSAT company, and we're still in our first year of operating in the GAMSAT space. But essentially what we do is we run tuition services here in Australia and across the world to be able to provide free health education in some of the most disadvantaged areas in rural Philippines. And that is a volunteering trip that is also open to everyone. But essentially all the funds that come through our GAMSAT and other tuition services goes directly towards that tuition in rural Philippines. I don't know why the slide has changed like that. But to date, we have had over 10, I think in the last season of GAMSAT, we've raised over 10 grand in funds to be able to provide that free health education elsewhere. So it's a very meaningful thing for us to be able to say, and we're very thankful for every student who comes through our services who contributes to that number. I guess the big thing of why we're in the GAMSAT space is very much because we've had an incredible team of volunteers who've come on that trip, who have gone on to do med, who've done extremely well on GAMSAT. We're very lucky to have our GAMSAT team who are incredible. But they also, when they were going through their GAMSAT journey, experienced incredible, I guess, inequity and not being able to get tuition services really affordably. And that's essentially what we're just trying to fill here and try to make, quality GAMSAT tuition really affordable. I guess, literally, I think the difference that we always echo in our GAMSAT services is that we are always there just to see people succeed. And that's literally it. That's all our tutors want. I find it really funny that when we launched this, one of my good high school friends actually asked me, like, you're just giving out free content. Is this going to be an ad? So we put a little bit of a joke in there of hashtag not an ad, but we just think it's so funny that people just expect to come into these things being sold to. But truly, we're just here to be able to, and I think it's so rewarding for us to be able to share some value and just share content and make sure, and, I guarantee after every one of these sessions, you go away with something of value and have learned something. And just, I think, as a testament to sort of how much our tutors get out of just seeing you guys succeed, we're just so lucky, I guess. I don't know why the slide is changing like that. But if you got to see the screenshot on the other slide beforehand, it was a student who we just found out last Friday had improved by like 11 points in their score, and that was sort of almost across the board in all of our students, or majority of our students who had came through our last season. So that was extremely rewarding. And like I said, I can almost guarantee at the end of all these sessions that you do take something away, and that is purely because you have Sarah here. And so I'd love to tell you a bit about Sarah, who's going to take you through the content of this session. So Sarah is our head of GAMSAT. She is totally the brains behind Hallett's GAMSAT. She's also come on one of our, on the first volunteering trip with Hallett, and is now studying her MD3 at Monash. And it's a bit of an inside joke here that Sarah also takes on the role as an IT guru because she fixes all of our Zoom problems, which is true. So lucky that we have her today. Very much, I guess, jokes aside, I will always vouch that there is no one probably who wants to get you into med more than Sarah does. She's totally that kind of person who goes above and beyond, and you will get to see that in the next sort of 2 hours, luckily. But I guess, she's also that kind of tutor who will keep you always accountable. And all of our students love the fact that by the time they get into week 3, week 6 of sort of our course, she's the kind of person who would sort of pick you up on not making progress and keeping you accountable. And even though it's tough, and she'll always call out if, you know, you need to make improvements or sort of have a mindset change. You know, our students love that in the end, and it shows for sure. Oh, I wish this would work with my cursor, but this is a little about me. If you haven't met me yet, I'm co-founder and managing director at Hallard, which just means I get the privilege of working with the incredible team here day in, day out. Essentially, I started Hallard as a university student, actually, in our final years, just doing a humanitarian project to do good around the world and be able to provide free health education. And that is exactly where we are a year later, doing exactly that. And even better, being able to sustainably fund that through all of our GAMSAT services. I will disclose I have never sat the GAMSAT, no, do not intend to, based on all of our students' feedback and sort of bad experiences. I do not think they've sold me on it. So please don't ask me on GAMSAT questions. If you do, I'm so happy to compile them for you and hand them straight over to Sarah. But I guess today what I'll be doing is manning the tech behind the scenes. So the chat room, I'll just be popping in links and whatnot for you there, to make sure that Sarah can keep going, and I'll man the chat for you there. I guess the last thing I wanted to touch on before I pass over to Sarah is just the big thing that I think is the major difference. You know, now that we've actually seen the first GAMSAT students who have come through us and then now gotten their results from the May GAMSAT, which have been absolutely incredible, we've learned a major lesson, and that is the biggest point of difference, and probably the reason why their scores improved so much was just our core philosophy of having a bigger perspective. We truly don't mentor students who just want that incredible GAMSAT score. We mentor students who want to have that mindset to become incredible medical professionals. And at the end, and I can truly say after that first season going through, of all those students who came through, those two things are very different. And you can see the stark difference between the two kind of students. And I think there's no better way to exemplify it than this email that we got from a beautiful student called Danica. And Sarah doesn't know that I've actually put this into the slides because it's a bit of a homage to her, and how reliable and just like of a role model she is for the aspiring sort of next generation of medical professionals. But I just want to read this bit because I think it just speaks beyond words. She said, I feel like I learned more than just techniques for the exam, but also a new way of thinking and conversing with people. Whenever I receive corrections from you at the 2 a.m.s, which I still don't know how that happens, and Sarah, you should be sleeping. And when you talk about medicine, I sense a level of commitment and passion you have. And from this, I see what kind of energy is required from a doctor. Thanks for allowing us to get to know you, even though I won't miss GAMSAT preparations anymore. Yay for Danica. I will be sure to miss your lessons. I just think that just sums it up also well, because I guess the first set of all of our lessons, the masterclass today, before we go straight into doing questions and content, is taking time to have that bigger perspective of why this exam actually exists and how it actually tests those skills that they're looking for in a medical professional. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Sarah, who's going to take you through for the next 2 hours. And then what we'll do is I'll give you a little bit of a 1 minute breather, and then we'll go into some more Q&A with some of our current sort of med students who've gone through our GAMSAT season before, to give you words of advice for how to do it online. And then you can ask anything to all of our tutoring team who will be here at, I think, 12. So over to you, Sarah.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you so much, Laz. So yeah, I feel like I have big shoes to fill now, big expectations, but thank you for coming along wherever you are in the world. I know it's an early Saturday morning if you're here in Australia with us. So hopefully it will be beneficial for you over the next couple of hours. But basically just to set up a bit of an expectation for today, I've set up today's sort of masterclass to cover things that you might not know about the GAMSAT if you've never sat it before. It's totally fine if you have, and it's also fine if you already know about the GAMSAT. But if you do already know a bit about it, just hang tight, because I do just want to go over some of the things in case people are a little bit disoriented about what this crazy exam is all about. And then hopefully we can jump into some stuff that can help all of you. And if you walk away feeling like you've learned something, then that's fantastic. So yeah, just to start out, this is just an overview of the GAMSAT, and as you'll probably know, it was a little bit different. The first sitting of this year, it happened in May. Top line is what you usually have to do for GAMSAT. Bottom line is what the May sitting required. At this stage, we have no idea how GAMSAT will proceed in the future, and including September, nothing official has been released by ASA. So if you have any questions about that, sorry, can't help you with that at the moment, but hopefully they release something soon. But I guess more importantly, what today is about is, what are they looking for from you? What are you expected to walk into the exam being prepared to do? So something that comes straight out of the ASA manual is that section 1 is called Reasoning in Humanities, Social Sciences. Section 2 is Written Communication, and section 3 is Reasoning again in Biological and Physical Sciences. So basically, the 2 key skills that they want to make sure you have are reasoning and communication skills. And so I really wanted to focus on that today and sort of incorporate it into the whole point of this exam. So firstly, I guess, what is the whole point of the GAMSAT? Why are they putting you through this? Why do you have to get a score that you can submit to apply for medical school or dentistry or wherever it is you might want to be applying? And the main reason is to assess your humanness, assess your ability to understand what it means to be human and to connect with other people beyond just using the brains that you already all have, because you're all intelligent and they already know that. So they're trying to assess something a little bit different about you. So what I'm going to do is go over each of the sections a little bit. How this will run is I'm going to tell you a bit about the different components that the sections are looking at in terms of the qualities of a doctor, the qualities of a healthcare professional, and then I'm going to launch into showing you some actual content in case you're not very familiar with it, or even if you are, just give you a bit of practice and some tips and techniques along the way. So I'm going to start with section 1. So section 1 is a section that I think a lot of students worry about and they find quite concerning and difficult because it can feel foreign, and it's not involving science and it's not involving your writing ability. So it's engaging with texts and engaging with contents which can feel uncomfortable at times. And a lot of people ask me, well, why? What's the point? Why are we doing this? And I really think it comes down to the fact that medicine and medical school, or being a healthcare professional and working with people, is not actually a science. So whilst you need that core basis of the knowledge of whatever your specialty or your career entails, beyond that, every day you're engaging with and working with people and with real lives that matter. And so I think that when I realized this really helped me in the way that I viewed the way my skills were progressing and the things that I was learning, rather than was I only learning clinical skills, was I also learning how to listen better and care more about others. And that's really what this section is testing if you're able to do and think about. And I remember one of my friends in medical school in, I think it was first year, she told me that something that she wanted was always to get into med, but she was really worried because she was way better at sort of the social sciences and humanities in school than she was at science. And so she was scared that she'd never have the scientific ability to get in. And then she said later that she actually realized that it was better for her, and that's probably why she wanted to do medicine, was because she loved people and she loved thinking through things and thinking through problems and problem solving. And that was actually more what was driving her to want to do medicine and be part of this career path. So that's sort of what I wanted to talk a little bit about today. I think that there's a little bit of misunderstanding about what we think good patient care is versus what it actually is. So we think that they want someone who's super smart, who's like able to get the right diagnosis and treatment, who's able to help them recover really fast, and basically they want a perfect robot, which if they did, we would have already made sure that those robots existed and that's what was happening in our clinical care. But it's not. What our patients actually want is that they want someone to be there and to listen. And when you listen, to actually take it in and understand. And then once you've understood, to feel something and be compassionate and willing to help them because of that compassion. And so they want to feel like their experience is valid and that then you can use your knowledge to help them out. So really, the best healthcare professionals that I've met and the healthcare professionals that I want to see in the future are ones who have that lovely balance of humanness and emotion and being able to be understanding and empathetic, and also clinical expertise and being able to couple those together. And so how can you work that out to make sure that people do well on a test that can indicate whether they'll be able to present these skills? And that's really what section 1 is all about. Can you synthesize information and understand the emotion and the connections behind the text or behind what's being presented to you? And so in a little while, I'm going to show you some examples of section 1, and we'll talk about how these kinds of examples can show whether you have that kind of thinking of how people relate and how people feel about different circumstances, and can show compassion and your ability to empathize with other people's situations. So my philosophy is that I do want you to do well on the GAMSAT, but I don't just want you to do well on the GAMSAT. I also want you to be a terrific healthcare professional in whatever you end up doing in your career. And I guess the key skills that are tested in section 1 are those softer skills of being a healthcare professional. And so they're ones I've already mentioned, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but can you reason through people's emotions and social context? Can you notice things like nonverbal cues? Can you notice things in language and tone? Can you relate to themes like loss and sadness, which can be really difficult to relate to, especially if you are applying for these careers quite young? And can you also understand what it's like to be in pain and for things to happen in your life that are unexpected? And also this concept, I'm sure if you've heard a bit about section 1 before, you've heard about the dreaded philosophical texts. And the reason why philosophy turns up in this section and what this has to do with getting into medical school is because it's really assessing if you can understand what it means to be human and to experience life. And that's all about connecting with your patients, is all about you being able to understand that. And so I guess my final part for now about section 1 is it's assessing, if I could wrap it up in a statement, it's assessing, can you make a helpful inference from the information given to you? So whatever they give you in the stimulus, whatever they're asking you about in the questions, can you make a helpful inference? Because if you can do this, it's a really good diagnostic of seeing if you can do the same thing in a clinical setting. So if you're wondering why we even bother with this section, this is where the money's at. This is why. All right, so now I'm going to shift over to section 2. Section 2 is a little bit different. Instead of being a set of stems and stimuli and questions, you are required to write 2 writing pieces. So you have an hour, so roughly 30 minutes to write each piece, and you'll be given a prompt for each one, and each prompt is a set of quotes on a common theme. So I'll go over that a little bit more when we crack through some section 2 sort of practice, but I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the point of this section and how it differs from section 1. So, sorry, there's my slide there. Yes, I will go back just briefly. An exercise for you guys all to do after today is make a list of some of the qualities that you think you would want to see in a good healthcare professional. So if someone was taking care of you, what would you want them to see? And see if there are parts in you that you can emulate that are similar to those. So yes, now on to section 2, very similar. I still want those same qualities to come out when my students write a piece. And the reason why is because I want people to be able to show who they are. And this is my favorite section of the GAMSAT because it really is an opportunity to show who you are and bring a little bit of yourself and your passions and your beliefs into the exam and into how you go. And I put this slide in here because I really love Frozen and Disney. Anna's actually my favorite Disney princess, not Elsa, but Elsa sang this song about showing yourself, so she gets to be on the slide today. But I think images also help to convey a message sometimes, and they can be quite memorable. So if you remember nothing else, I'd love you to remember that section 2 is your opportunity to show yourself, not only your personal self, but also your professional self and how that can come out in a clinical context. So the reason why they do this one, and if you remember a few minutes ago, I said section 2, all about communication, is because communication is so pivotal to your professionalism and your careers. And so I guess the things that are really assessed in the writing that you produce in this section is if you can make sense, if you can be concise, and if you can be clear and communicate what you would like to say in a really clear format. And so if you're able to communicate logically and clearly and not ramble for ages, then you've hit the brief. And so these are some of the things, I guess, that are involved in important communication. And for you guys listening, probably not so much a part of section 2, although you do need to correctly interpret the prompt, but definitely open-mindedness, confidence are key parts that can be assessed in this section. And yeah, like I mentioned, section 1 skills definitely still overlap, and being able to show perhaps a greater depth of those skills, such as if you are a particularly empathetic person or you're a particularly good logical reasoner, I would be making sure that those skills shine as I write. So what are some ways that you can show yourself in this section and show that you belong in this career pathway? You're able to talk about your passions and interests, to discuss those in relation to the prompt. You can show your beliefs and your values on a topic or on a range of topics. You can also sort of convey how you view the world and how you think and how that relates to how others think and how that could affect society and affect things beyond you. And you're also welcome to weave in personal experiences. I like to tell my students that everyone has a story to tell, and it's important to feel like you're welcome to tell your story. And it's a practice to learn how to tell that story in the right way and in relation to the prompt correctly. So that's a bit about section 2 and why we do section 2. Finally, why they have section 3. Section 3 is a bit dreaded. A lot of students get quite nervous about this section, and they say it's the science section, but I would correct that whilst it does have a strong presence of science, it's more about your reasoning and your ability to solve a puzzle rather than how much recall ability you have about particular scientific topics, which is why I've put here this note about it not being all about what you know. So I know people get concerned if they don't have a scientific background, but that's not what it's testing. It's not testing what you studied or where you studied. It's testing how you think and whether you can reason logically. And so I put in this picture to just sort of explain why. And the reason why is because clinical reasoning is a pivotal part of being a healthcare professional. And this is an awful diagram. I literally just found it on Google Images and it's a nightmare. So I made another one for you guys, which makes a lot more sense to me. But this is just to prove to you here how complicated and complex it is to be a healthcare professional and thinking on your feet all the time. And that's why they're testing this in section 3. So I made one that also looks a little bit full on, but I like to think of it as a puzzle, and that all the puzzle pieces have to fit together. And that's what they're trying to assess. So when you see a section 3 text and it feels really overwhelming and it's bombarding you, that's because they're trying to test if you can grab lots of information together and do this thing, even though you've never had to do it before. So I'm just going to walk you through it really quickly. So when I see a patient, I go in, I introduce myself. I'm like, hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a 3rd year medical student. How are you today, etc. And then the first thing I do is I ask them to tell me their story. And so I ask them, why did you come in here? Which is, sorry, I've abbreviated this all so it can fit on the slide, but I've asked them their history of presenting complaints. So I ask them, what happened? And why do you think it happened? And when did it happen? So there are my W's. And then I ask some Q's. So I ask quality and quantity. So maybe if they're in pain, I ask, what's the pain feel like and how bad is the pain? And then the A's are alleviating and aggravating. So does anything make it better and does anything make it worse? Ask them about any risk factors they might have. Maybe they have cardiovascular disease and maybe they've come in with chest pain. I ask them about their history. So has this happened before? I asked them about their family history. Has anyone else in your family had a heart attack or had any cardiovascular complications? So that's just one piece of the puzzle. And I think people think sometimes that one part of the puzzle makes up all of it, but that's just simply not true. So I'm already thinking, as I ask these questions, I'm thinking about this puzzle piece at the same time, which are differentials, which is really just a fancy word for what could it be. So if I'm thinking about chest pain, I'm thinking, well, there are some red flags. So maybe it's a pulmonary embolism, or maybe it's a heart attack, which could be really bad. I'm also thinking, what could be the most likely thing for this person? If it's a super young person, it's probably less likely to be a heart attack. So I need to think about other things. And then are there any weird and wonderful things it could be? So have they got some rare virus that I need to check out? Which then also at the same time I'm thinking about, how am I going to investigate this? Do they need imaging? Do they need blood tests? What do they need? And I need to think about, is it cost effective? Is it available? Is it the gold standard for what I'm trying to rule in or rule out? Am I trying to exclude something or am I trying to include something? And then at the same time, I'm also thinking about evidence, and I'm thinking about the data that's come out on people with these same risk factors and these same complications going on, and thinking about things like, how many people would it take for there to be a successful treatment, and
what's the risk, the relative risk of giving them a certain management, and what's the likelihood ratio that they have this condition at all. So I'm thinking about all these things at once while I'm trying to care about the patient at the same time. And this orange circle is the whole picture of clinical reasoning. And this is the circle that I then use to determine what the likely diagnosis is and then the management and treatment plan. So I know that that was a whole lot, and you definitely don't need to memorize any of that. I just want you to appreciate the reason why they give you these very intense, overwhelming Section 3 texts and tasks. And the reason why is because somehow they have to work out if you're capable of being able to do all of this. And if you're able to do all of this, then you're good, because then you can care about the patient. Okay, so that's a nice sort of overview of what's the point of this GAMSAT thing? Why are we doing this? What are all the sections for? I want to spend the rest of the time actually giving you guys a chance to give some things a try, to see what it's like, to understand what each section entails. So we're just going to go in order and spend about half an hour on each. I'll try and make it a bit more interactive. So I'll have a poll up for you to attempt the questions. Don't worry about getting them right or wrong. It really doesn't matter, and we'll go through them as we go. So, Section 1. Firstly, just in case you haven't done Section 1 before or seen anything or read anything about it, there are a few different text types. So long texts are probably the most common. There's a bulk of text that you have to read in the form of stems, and then they'll ask 4 to 5 questions, sometimes more, about that text. And so your text can be in the forms of fiction. Fiction can be in styles of things like speeches, narratives, plays, conversations, different comments on different things. Non-fiction, you can have a factual text. You can also have a set of passages on a topic and have to compare them. And within the non-fiction, super popular, not really, are the philosophical texts. And so asking you to be able to understand humanness, human nature, and I guess concepts about life. And then we move on to poetry. Poetry can be in both more modern poetry and in Old English, think sort of Shakespeare, but it doesn't have to be Shakespeare. These make up the crux of it. So these two text types make up the majority. And then we also have a bit of proverbs, which can sort of be like asking you what a particular saying or proverb means, or maybe tapping into a definition. And then also there's a component with some problem solving and diagrams that can come up. And I've left off one of the other important ones, which is visual texts, more commonly known as cartoons. And I do have one of those for you guys next. So we'll talk a little bit more about those. So some of the question types that can come up, and I guess keep thinking in the back of your mind, that role of being a doctor that I've harped on about for the past 20 minutes, that they can ask you to be able to interpret the tone, ask you to understand or infer emotional cues and the emotions conveyed in a text, to understand the circumstances and what's going on, why is it going on, who's it going on between, and to be able to interpret different language conventions. Also, if you can have an opportunity to work out what the deeper meaning of the text is, and if you can sort of delve into a text and understand the overall point or the overarching concept and theme of the text. And I think understanding relationships and how people interact, how they communicate, events, how they feel about things is also really critical. And I think I mentioned before, universal themes, things like loss, pain, love, they tend to crop up a lot. And I think it's really checking in on, can you understand these themes and these concepts, which can sometimes be quite sensitive. So let's give some things a try. I have a text for you here. It is a visual text. What I'm going to get you to do is have a read. I'm going to make a poll active. When you've got some answers, put them in the poll. No one can see who put in what. It's anonymous, so don't worry about that. And then when you're done, we'll chat about people's responses and what the answers are. Okay, so it looks like most of you have had a chance to answer. I'll give you a couple more seconds in case you haven't submitted. It's good to see a nice range of responses for this one. Yeah, good. Okay, great. Also, there is one more thing I'd like to discuss about Section 1. and it matches Niha's question quite well. I'm going to wait till the end of doing this section, and I'll just go over some of the, I guess, myths that come up with section 1 and how you should prepare. Cool. All right, I'm just going to click share results so everyone can see them. The red, I don't know why it does this, but the red is the result that the most people picked rather than whether it's the right result or not. Cool. So these are the correct results. I think what I'd like to do first, though, is just really quickly go over how to interpret a text like this, and I guess a couple of my tips. So the first thing before you even look at the questions, or if you like to look at the questions first, that's completely fine, you can do that. But before I want people to attempt questions, I want you to work out what is going on. So when I look at this image, initially, I am drawn to this part, all dogs must be on a leash, and then I have a bit of a laugh because the dogs are carrying the leash and they're walking. So hopefully you guys all got that too. But I think what's really important is to look at it and go, what's going on? What was the intended purpose? So in this case, or I like to tell my students, I want you to work out whether the cartoon was meant to be funny or not. And in this case, it is meant to be funny. So because it is meant to be funny, whether you find it funny or not doesn't matter. You need to work out, like, what's the joke? Why is it funny? And the reason why it's funny is really has very little to do with the man. And I think that's where this can get confusing, is thinking that this cartoon is all about this guy, but it's actually more about the signs and the dogs. So it's more about the fact that dogs are supposed to be on a leash, and then it's like, they are on a leash, but not the way that you usually expect. So I think making sure that you understand what is it about and what was the purpose of it. Was it to educate? Was it to be mad about a political issue? Was it to be funny? And then whatever that purpose was, then find out how was that purpose played out. And in this case, the way the purpose was played out was by contrasting these two elements. So the dogs over here and the sign over here. And this is quite a textual sign, it's textual information, and this is visual information. And so we've got a lot of elements here. Whereas if we chose expression, that's more because it's about the expression of the man, which isn't really the main or the most significant part of the image. So we put this one in here, a little bit of a trick question for you, more to illustrate the things to look for in a cartoon. In terms of the humor predominating, very similar in terms of once you nut out what's going on in the cartoon or in the image, makes it a lot simpler to work through. And so asking yourself again, why is it funny? And honestly, I don't find it that funny, and that's fine. I would say if the option there, play on words, was there, I would say that is the correct option, because you've got dogs being on a leash, but they're literally like they're on the leash, but not really. But then instead, the next best would be a surrealism or a surreal humor. And the reason why it would be a surrealism is because it's surreal or ridiculous to look over and see dogs walking themselves and having the cognitive understanding of how to like carry the leash and walk themselves. So, and it's implied in this that they have like, they are doing this in response to the sign, like, oh, we can't walk without a leash, we're walking with one. So there's a surreal humor there for you. However, then the man, that's when the man comes in, he looks over and he's like, what is going on? And that's where he's feeling confused. I'd say disoriented is probably a little bit strong, and he'd only be feeling robbed if the dogs were his or the leash was his. He looks like he's a groundskeeper. So I like to also look at each of the components. He's wearing some like uniform, official hat. He's got a bag with things in it. Could be who knows what. And then he's got some sort of tool. And I think the thing with cartoons is don't overthink them too much in terms of what is what, because elements are drawn very simplistically for a reason. It's because you're not meant to need to look too much into them. But because you can tell that it doesn't look like he's out exercising, working out, walking his dogs, it's unlikely that they're his dogs. So he's probably not feeling angry or confused, angry or robbed, because they don't really have anything to do with him. He's just looking over and he's like, what is going on? So when you're able to conceptualize what's going on in the image, it can help you drastically to understand what they want you to gain from the questions. So hopefully that was a fun one for you guys to do. Maybe the questions weren't as fun, but the cartoon wasn't too bad. Another dreaded text type are the poems. Don't worry, I chose one that was not Shakespearean this time around. I'm going to do the same thing, set up the poll, and I want you guys to have a go at the poll, at the poem and submit your question answers in the poll. All right, great. Looks like most of you are done. So same deal. We'll chat through it a bit. And I'm just going to, I'll share the results again. I think I just wanted to pause here as well and just help you guys appreciate, I guess, the spectrum or the range of answers that people have. And I think that this is really indicative of how section 1 and even section 3 of the GAMSAT works, is that there are a lot of options that look really good and a lot of the answers are varied. And so it's a little bit of a skill, and I think it takes practice and it takes time. And I don't want you to walk away feeling like you suck or you can't do this or anything negative just because you're like, oh, I thought I answered all the questions correctly and I didn't. That's not the point of today. The point of today is to show you the text, expose you to some of the concepts, and then you can go away and continue to feel more familiar with it. And so definitely don't feel bad about any of this. I just hope it sort of opens your eyes a bit to some of the things that you can get asked to know how to do and some of the skills involved. So with poetry, I find it really helpful to make sure that I understand the poem rather than just skimming through and looking for parts that I'm like, oh yeah, I kind of know that part, and then the rest of it is a confusing poem. So same deal as the cartoon, take your time to work out what's going on. In fact, yeah, I always tell my students, I want to hear a summary. Like if I came up and asked you what was it about, I would expect you to be able to tell me in your own words what it was about. And if you're not able to do that, then go back to the text and try again. So with this one, what's the poem about? Well, the poem, if I was to sort of sum it up to you, I'd say the poem's about an old man reflecting on his experiences in schooling or his education experiences and comparing them to how children learn now. So modern learning of children. And that was the entire poem. And there are definitely parts in there then to pick apart, and you will get asked to pick it apart, but you definitely do need to know what it's about first and foremost, which helps with then from the get-go, question 1, the poem, what the poem utilizes the best. And whilst there is a tiny bit of metaphor and there's a little bit of loose rhyming, so questioning and sing and everything, that's kind of it. So I'm not seeing a consistent rhyme or a duplet rhyming between every second line. It's just occasionally there's some rhyming, and I'm really not sure if that was intentional or not by the author, or if they just really like verbs and putting ing on the end of words. So the most important part though of this is that it's utilizing this juxtaposition between an old man and reflecting on what his childhood was like and just sort of questioning what's it like now for children, and looking at them studying and learning and doing things children do and the way that they look at the world, and he's watching them. So there's this instant comparison between the old and the young, the learned and the learning, and so you can use that to help guide you. In terms of a name for this text, this is a bit more of a hard one, and I think it really, again, helps to know what was the poem about, summarize the poem. And so then it helps you to know that the key component of the poem is looking at these children and how they're learning. And so how are they understanding, grasping concepts of the world? How do they see the world? How are they learning about life? What skills are they learning? And so then this would probably be the most appropriate name for the text. Why does that keep happening? Yes, hope of the future, because he's looking at the children, looking at their wonder for the world, looking at the skills they're learning, and reflecting on that. And I guess a runner-up would probably be A, the good old days, because there is some reflection going on and he's sort of thinking about his school days, but I wouldn't say that that's the most fitting or that that's what the text is predominantly about. It's more highlighting what the children themselves are doing and what he's watching them doing. In terms of, and also I just wanted to point out B, life lessons. This is a common, I guess they put in red herrings for a lot of options, but when you think through them, it becomes clearer. So B looks like quite a promising option because the children are learning lessons. But when you think about the term life lessons, it more refers to things like personal experience or people, I guess, like the key salient lessons of life. Whereas while it's great that they're learning books and history, perhaps being neat in everything isn't as much a life lesson. So they're more learning lessons from books and lessons like in a more rigid format rather than learning the life lessons. And so these sorts of things, you'll notice them come up in questions as you start to become familiar with GAMSAT questions. It's really common to put in options there that look really good and sound really good, but they're not quite hitting the nail on the head in terms of exactly what the text was about. Yep, this one's more just understanding, I guess, language conventions. They love to ask you at least 1 or 2 language convention questions. You don't need to be a guru on language. There are sort of things, yays and nays of things to know. And one of them is probably knowing that when things are put into a different context, such as a 60-year-old smiling public man, this is really just his way of saying, I'm old and I'm going to die soon. But it's pretty brash to say something like that. Hence, it's a euphemism, which is just a fancy word for saying that you're softening what something sounds like. And then I guess we've already covered this a fair bit and you guys pretty much all got this one. Definitely a pensive tone, so very reflective, very internally reflective. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that one. So I think the key things I want you to get away from this and from text as a whole is asking yourself the right questions to work out what it's about, what are the key features, what's the key lesson or the key theme in this text. Okay, so we're going to do one more of section 3. This one's slightly longer. It's a little bit of an easier text. It's a factual one, and what I'm going to get you all to do, because I couldn't fit everything on the one slide, take a screenshot of the text when you're ready. Maybe just thumbs up either on your screen or in the chat when you've got a screenshot, and then I'll go to the slide with the questions on it. Yep. Fabulous. Okay. Great. I think that's everyone. Okay. So here are your questions, and you guys know how it works now with the poll. So let me just reset. All right, looks like almost everyone's done. And very similar again this time with a good mix of responses. And I'm going to tell you guys very similar sort of technique and tips for this one. I'm just going to go back to the text for a second. Great. So working out what the text is, what's going on, what is it about, what's the point of the text, what's it telling me, what's it teaching me. You don't need to ask yourself all these questions, but I would have a set of things that I do, or I do this, I get the text and I have a set of things that after I'm done reading the text, I know I can answer. So for me, it's can I summarize the text in a few words? Or if it's really massive, it might even be, can I summarize each paragraph in a word or a phrase? And then also, what was the point of it? What was it about? What were the key things? So have sort of your own things that you ask yourself to engage with the text. And I think that became particularly helpful for my students when it went online and you weren't able to annotate and write all over the paper. So you had to actively read and remember things. Sorry, and then we'll go here. So just really quickly, I wanted to discuss a couple of the questions here. It's great the majority of you picked B for question 1. And so there's a part in the passage that talks about the globalization of Hugo, I think is how it's meant to be said, and sort of what has sort of happened with this movement of the Western world embracing this term. I think from this question, what I'd like to sort of show you guys is how to grab evidence from the text. And so when you're looking for the answer to a question, the first thing I like to do is check if the text can help me to answer it. And then if the text isn't helping me to work it out, that's when I have to sort of start to think a little bit broader. So the first step, check if the text can support what you're looking for. And I guess here, there's a lot of evidence in here in terms of living the Danish way has become commercialized across the globe, and there's various interpretations to justify whimsical passions and selfish pursuits. And so that skill of being able to summarize it in your own words comes into play here, because I can ask myself, wait, what is this actually saying? And what it's talking about is people using this beloved Danish term of warmth, comfort, taking care of yourself, having a balanced life, to justify being selfish. So to justify things like that self-care movement. I'm sure you guys have all seen it on things like social media, where it's like, I'll just buy myself something that I don't need just to feel good, or I'm not going to go out and care about other people or see my friends or whatnot because, you know, it's self-care or it's hygge or whatever the current trend is. And so it became trendy. And so I guess, obviously, I'm not going to sit there and talk myself through all those steps. But when I read that line, that's what I think of in my mind. I associate it with something I recognize and I know, and it helps me to understand what's going on. And so from that, what I understand here is that the problem is that whilst the Danes are happy for anyone to use their term and use their sort of connection to life and how they approach life and happiness, what's ended up happening is that we've missed the point entirely. So whilst they understand the point or the essence of life, we've missed it, and we've just thought that this term holds sort of an excuse to be selfish and just do whatever we feel like doing to please ourselves and indulge. So I guess that's what I wanted to go over in terms of a really salient technique for long texts. The other ones, let me just go to the next one. Yeah. The other ones you guys pretty much all nailed. So just in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. We're going to go over some section 2, but just before I do, I wanted to close up with a couple of things about what you should do from now until sort of when you sit the GAMSAT, things to think about for section 1. So firstly, I would definitely recommend practice. When you practice, make sure that you reflect. And so when you do the exercises like we've just done, ask yourself, how did I go? Why do I think I went that well or didn't go so well, or what parts did I struggle with? What things was I unable to do? Why did I struggle with it? Did I struggle because I didn't understand what the text meant? Or did I struggle because I rushed? Did I zone out? What can I do to stop zoning out? So rather than just doing questions and thinking that by doing more questions you'll get better, what I want you to do is actually practice through reflecting as you go and going, okay, I need to come up with or develop a technique or try something different so that next time I get that same style of text or question, I know what to do. So that's the first thing. The other thing is I get a lot of questions about what should I read? What should I engage in? What should I do to make sure I'm prepared for section 1? And I think there's a lot of misconception about what to do. And people hear the term read widely and they think that they have to go away and read all these newspapers and know about politics and know about all of these intense kind of subjects that can really make you fall into this rabbit hole of learning and cramming in all this unnecessary information. So definitely you don't need to be up to date with world affairs. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this for section 2 in terms of what you can write about. If you'd like to be up to date with things, that's fine, but that's probably more appropriate for section 2 than section 1. Particularly over the past year, 2 years, section 1 of the GAMSAT has shifted more towards texts which are more about those things I mentioned at the start. So testing things like humanness, philosophy, understanding how people live their lives and view the world and the experiences they have. It's far less about what's actually going on currently, and you won't be disadvantaged if you don't know about politics or about someone who's in power. Also remembering that the test is taken by people from several countries, and so it wouldn't be fair to give you something niche that's in world news. So if they gave you something in world news, it would be something that you would definitely recognize and know enough about. So, and they would give you context about it in the text as well. So that's just something to be aware of. If there are things you feel uncomfortable with, such as ethics or philosophy, it can be helpful to sort of look up a 10-15 minute sort of crash course video on it or read an article or two, but definitely you don't need to go away and start to read all these books with theories in them and philosophers in them. Definitely not the point of section 1, and definitely not what they're trying to test. They're not testing how much you love literature, they're testing how you think through the information given to you. So that's all I'm going to say about section 1 for now. If you have questions at the end, you can put them in the chat, but we're going to shift gears. And like I mentioned before, section 2 is my favorite section. And hopefully this will be a good little exercise for you guys that I'm going to walk you through today. So firstly, I wanted to go through how section 2 is marked. It's okay if you're still sitting there going, I don't really know what section 2 is. I don't know what I have to do. I will go over that as well. But basically you have 60 minutes to write, or now you get 65 minutes. Not sure if they'll make 5 of those reading time again, but 65 minutes to write 2 essays, including making sure you plan them. And then they get marked. And I think that there's a lot of confusion about what ACER is actually looking for and what the point of these tasks are. So we already went over the ability to communicate well, and I'm going to show you, this is the rubric that I like to use, and I'm going to show you why. The reason why is because ACER has only disclosed or open sourced 2 main marking criteria. The first one is the quality of thinking about the topic, and the second is how language was used to demonstrate your understanding. That's literally all they tell you. And so it takes a little bit of cluing around to work out what that even means and what they're looking for. So I've put together a slide of what these actually mean. This is quite a hefty slide. You're welcome to screenshot it if you like. But the quality of thinking about a topic is what I like to call thought and content. So what did you actually put in there and how are you thinking about it? And so I guess when I read an essay, a good essay, a top response, it must have these things in there. And it doesn't matter, I'm going to go over this a bit more in a minute, it doesn't matter what form you would like to write in, it just needs to have these kinds of things in there. So you need to address the prompt in terms of having something to say about it. And so that's literally the first thing I do when I read a prompt. I take a step back, take a breath and go, what do I think about this? What's my gut reaction? What does Sarah think about this prompt? And so I want you to ask yourself that, and it doesn't matter what you're going to write after that, what style, etc. You should have something to say about the prompt. And if you don't have something to say that links to the prompt, then you missed the brief, and you can write me the most amazing piece of writing and you will be significantly marked down, unfortunately, because you haven't addressed the prompt. In terms of a higher quality, I'm looking for things like, when I read your piece, was it thought-provoking? Did it make me think? Was it interesting? Was I like, that's an interesting perspective or thought, a unique angle? There's a lot of prompts which can be quite generic. It's very easy to approach them with a very superficial lens. And so diving deeper or finding a different out of the box angle that still links back to the prompt provides a high quality. Showing passion, showing yourself, showing that you're interested in what you're saying is really important. And you don't have to feel like you have to come across with a personal example or using first person to convey that. You can convey passion by using interesting, unique examples that you're interested in, or about topics that you love. You can use a lot of things, and as you practice, you'll get better at that. And that sort of comes down to good evidence. I'm going to leave that at that for now, because the exercise I'm going to go through with you guys will be a bit more about evidence. And seeing if you can incorporate those qualities of a future healthcare professional. And so you're obviously not going to be able to put in all of them, but if you'd like to show your ability to reason, then put that in. If you would like to show that you're really empathetic, put that in. Basically, I want you to think about what are like my strengths, and I want you to show what those strengths are in there. So what strengths do I have that show that I would be a really good healthcare professional? Those should be going into your writing. And self-expression, I think that already like links back to the passion part, but this really is your chance, like I said, to show yourself. So I want to see part of you, and when I read good pieces, that's what I see. In terms of the language part, I don't really care if you're very fluent in English, if you're really expressive, if you're eloquent. That's not what I'm looking for. I've never met a doctor or a healthcare professional and gone away and gone, wow, they're so amazing because they're so eloquent. So I don't really care what words you use. It's more about when you present your information to me, is it logical? Does it flow? Is it clear? Have you made it nice and concise and wrapped it all up? And when I walk away, could I do that thing where I told you guys with the text that I could walk away and tell myself what the text was about and summarize it? Can I do that with what you wrote? Can I walk away and go, this is exactly what this person had to say about this topic? And I think that the reason why this is so important is this is a skill that you will use continually as a healthcare professional. When I hand over a patient to my supervisor or to a consultant, I have approximately 30 seconds. So in 30 seconds, I have to tell them the most important parts about the patient. So I don't have time to tell them the patient's whole life story. I have 30 seconds to tell them why they need to go into the patient's room and check that they're okay. And so it's the same thing. I want to read something that's concise, that's thought-provoking. You've brought out the key elements, and there it is for me to read. I don't have long to read your essay, so make it as good as you can. All right. So in terms of what you can write, I think there's a misconception that you have to write an essay, or that if you know a little bit more about the tasks, which I will go over in a second, or that task A has to be this really formal essay and task B has to be a more creative piece or more personal. That's definitely not true. It's a misnomer. You can do that if you like. You don't have to. It really doesn't matter what style you write in. So 2 things I'd suggest. First thing, have a play around with styles. See what you like. Practice you doing different writing in different styles, and then once you've worked out what's good for you, stick to it and practice it so you know it well. And so you can write a normal essay. I would say even if you write a normal teal essay, that doesn't mean that your essay or that your piece is less impressive. I don't really care how you write it. I care more about what you have to say. So I don't mind if you write me an essay or a beautiful narrative, or if you write it in a song or a poem, just as long as you have something to say that addresses the prompt and hits the brief. So write in the style that you would like to, and that helps you to express best what you want to say. So in terms of the 2 tasks, task A is more socio-cultural issues. So these are some of the common issues that can come up. You can literally find tons of examples online. We'll give you some examples as well today. And if you sign up to some of our Hallowed things, you can access a lot more examples to practice with. But these are the sorts of topics that have cropped up, and they come up in all sorts of permutations. Task B is a little bit different. It tends to tap more into emotional, which I think is where that concept of, oh, it's more personal can come from. But things like life experience, human connection, more abstract concepts, these tend to come up. However, these 2 tasks aren't mutually exclusive. And in the past, I've definitely seen topics come up that I was like, this could fit into task A or task B. So again, it's not exactly hard and fast. It's more that they have 2 different tasks to require you to write 2 pieces of writing and have a chance to give 2 different perspectives or talk about 2 different concepts or ideas. And sometimes the tasks aren't as separate from each other as they would seem. So don't overthink it. Don't try and prepare for each task separately. Just become really good at writing well and expressing yourself in relation to a prompt that you're given. All right, so I know that you're probably not feeling super ready and super comfortable in just launching in and writing something, but I really want to give you guys a chance to have a go at something that I find is really important in a good essay, and that is having a key concept to write about, or even an example that your piece can pivot around. And so what I want you guys to do is, on the next few slides, I'll briefly show you now, but I'll go back to them just so you know what the next few slides look like. They look like this, and there's different topics, so like political, health related. So I've got a few of them. I want you to choose one of the topics / categories. Have a pause when you choose it and ask yourself, why did I choose it? Was it like a gut reaction? I was drawn to it? Because usually if you choose a topic that you're drawn to, such as politics, it's probably because that's something you're interested in. So already you've identified, this is something that I'm passionate about, so it would probably benefit me to write about this topic. So that's just something I like to sort of use as a checkpoint for my students to make sure that they're actually writing about things that they enjoy. I really cannot stand politics. I find it really boring. I try to understand what I can. Every time election time comes around, I feel like I have to relearn everything. And so that really showed me that that probably wasn't a good topic for me to write about. And so even when there were essay prompts that came around that were more politically based, I'd try and link it more to things that I could relate to, such as how society was affected by politics. So that's just sort of an example for you of the importance of writing about things you're passionate about. And so then what I want you to do is, under each category, I've put a couple of prompting questions. Use them to help you think about the category. You can also come up with your own questions. And then what I want you to do is come up with make sure that you ultimately have an example or a topic that you would be able to discuss or insert into a piece of writing. And so if you were given a section 2 prompt that happened to be on a particular theme, you would be able to insert or use that example or that category and how you'd explored that category, be able to insert that into your writing. So what I want you to do, I'm going to like slowly show you the slides so that you can have time to screenshot or write down the category you'd like to choose. Once you've chosen, I'll give you about 5 minutes to have a go, and then we're going to talk about how you can use that to actually put it into an essay, and I'll give you an example of my own. It's okay if today you feel like you have no idea what's going on, give it a go. I would also suggest just screenshot these, or we're also recording this so you can come back to the recording later and you can try the other categories as well. So it's okay if today you don't feel like is the day that you're ready to do this, just give it a go anyway. So I'm going to go to the next slide now. So if you'd like to do any of these topics, you can take a screenshot. I figured I couldn't fit them all on one screen and have you still be able to read them. So we're just going to have to, yes, just like spend a couple of moments on each slide. What was I going to tell you guys? I don't know. That's okay. All right, maybe just some thumbs up if you've got a screenshot of it, just so I know if you need more time. Cool. Great. Okay. And the next slide. Okay. Yeah. And next slide. And also, if there's another category that's not on this list that you'd love to do that sort of seems to fit this, give it a go. You're welcome to. But also, this is definitely an exercise you can do in your own time and keep exploring and trying different topics. So I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes. I know that's not a lot of time, but it's okay if you don't finish. And then we'll chat through some things. Okay. Just if you get stuck, you can put questions in the chat as well. Pretty much. Yeah. All right, fantastic. Like I mentioned, it's so fun if you're not done. I just wanted to give you guys a chance to do some idea generation and think about what kinds of things can I explore, what can I bring to the table when I write, rather than just waiting and hoping that you can write something good. So, all right, what I'm going to do, all right, someone's in the waiting room. Sorry. Okay, so whatever you came up with, you can use this for a range of different things. You can use it to provide evidence. So let's say that you make a point in a traditional style essay, which is what I'm going to show you guys today. Then you can use it to go, okay, maybe I did the, why is this not clicking? There we go. Maybe I did the ethical one, and I'm really passionate about the debate around ethical fashion and sustainable fashion, which I am passionate about that if you've ever been one of my students. Then I can use that as an example if I had a topic on something like justice or sustainability or ethics or human rights. So there's lots of topics I could weave that into. I can also use it to form a contention or a thesis. So my contention around that could be that I don't think that businesses necessarily act ethically, and that sometimes this is sort of hidden under the rug, and I could form a thesis argument around that. And I know a lot about that because that's the topic that I explored. And then I can also use it to guide arguments. So I could break it down and go, well, why do I think that this happens? And what things do I know about this happening? What are the causative things? What are the solutions? So I hope that that sort of shows you how your idea generation can then be used as the foundation to build what you want to write about, which is why I think it's important that the ideas you generate are the things that you're genuinely passionate about, so that you can convey all those things I spoke about before. You can convey your passions, you can convey your strengths. So I know that if this is, like I mentioned, if this is one of the first times you're doing this, it probably feels very rushed and intense right now, but I'm going to launch you guys straight into looking at a prompt. the main thing I want you to do when you see a prompt is spend 30 seconds, a minute, making sure you know exactly what the prompt is about or what the overarching theme is. So I'm just going to pause for about 30 seconds so you all get a chance to read it, and then we'll quickly go over what it is, and then you can have a go. Okay, so hopefully reading through that, you got that it was about justice or justice versus injustice, something along those lines. It can be as simple as that, but the idea now is that whatever you come up with or whatever you write about needs to address the concept of justice/injustice in some way. So it doesn't matter which way you do that, you just have to incorporate that somehow. So what you're going to do now is write a plan of what you would write about. And so just really quickly, some of the things that I would have come up with when I was doing my idea generation were human emotions and mental health and well-being. So I'm going to put together a plan that focuses on these. I want you guys to put together a plan, something to do with your idea generation that you just did. It's okay if it's not amazing, just have a go. So I'll give you another 5-ish minutes, and then I'll show you an example of one I came up with to give you a bit of guidance as well. Okay, so hopefully you guys have put together a bit of a plan. As I mentioned, it's fine if you don't have a whole plan put together, but hopefully you had a chance to think about how can this theme of, or this overarching topic of justice/injustice link in with the things I'm interested in. And remembering back to what I said about when I read a theme, I always take a step back and go, what do I think about this? What is my main sort of thought on this? And so I'm going to show you an example of what I came up with. I just want to mention, like I said before, this is about showing yourself. So I don't want anyone to feel like, oh, I should have written it like her, or I should have written what she's writing. I'm happy for you to write something wildly different to what I would have written. This is about you and what you think. I guess the only no-no would be writing things that are highly inappropriate for you to be writing as someone who wants to be a healthcare professional. And I think that you can probably identify what some of those are. So we don't need to go over all of those right now. But like I mentioned, human emotion is something I'm really intrigued by. I'm really interested in how people respond to situations and how people are affected by their circumstances, how their emotions affected, and then how their emotions affect their society and the people around them. And then sort of things like when people are emotionally unstable and how we can solve that on a societal level and on an individual level, which also links into mental health and well-being, which is also something I'm super passionate about how important it is and how it really contributes to society and how our community functions. And I guess also that there's a big disparity in how people access support, and that there's a lot of roadblocks to mental health because, you know, there's different access points and, you know, there are different demographics and circumstances which can limit people's access to healthcare in general. And I guess looking into the solutions to how people can access healthcare is particularly mental health a lot better. And so I guess these are examples of some of the themes or idea generation that I focused on. And so then when I wrote up my plan, I wanted to make sure I incorporated those. And so here's an example of something I could have written about. So here is my thesis or my contention. I decided to just go with a real stock standard Teal style essay to keep it simple. Like I mentioned before, you can write in whatever style you like and communicate whatever message you wish. But in my case, I decided the main thing that I think about when I think about injustice is that when there's injustice in society, so disparity in social provisions, there becomes this crime against humanity and society can't progress anymore. So that's my concept. That's what I want to base my writing off of. And then I wanted to break it down. And so the first paragraph, I wanted to write about how when we have differences between individuals, so this disparity that I've brought up in my thesis, then certain people become systemically oppressed, or certain groups of individuals. And so what happens is when there's an unfairness, so lower demographics have that unfairness, we can sometimes focus in too much on what the unfairness happening is and forget the root cause, which is that there's disparity or inequality. So things like when we have hierarchies of race or of sex or of ability or literally anything, poverty versus rich, whatever it might be, when we focus only on going, oh, we need to solve racism or we need to solve sexism, then we forget that the real underlying problem we need to solve is the fact that we're not equal, and we need to fix our issues with having hierarchies in our society. And so that's something I'm really passionate about, and I think is really scary that we form these hierarchies in society. So that's what I'd wanted to start talking about. And that's a big problem at the moment. You guys would all have seen things about the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think that only scratches the surface in terms of how we have all these hierarchies in humanity and in society, and we treat each other unfairly all the time based on our differences. So that's what I'd want to explore in terms of justice. So that's an example of how you can find things that you find really interesting and that you're passionate about and weave them in. And then I'd want to take it a step further and go, well, how can we fix these things? And I think an important way to fix them is make sure that everyone has access to the same resources. But if we don't have access to them, then we're limited and our society is limited. And so, sorry. You just colored you. Thanks. Sorry about that, guys. And so then I could bring in my idea about, for example, when people are mentally unwell, then they are unable to access quality services because they are underprivileged or they are seen as being in the lower class of the hierarchy. Then they aren't able to reach their potentials and they're not able to contribute to society. So everyone gets damaged by this systemic oppression. And then the final one is that idea that I really loved about how humans respond to things and how humans act and how humans express their emotions. And I guess that the main thing I thought about was how human nature is highly dependent on how we respond to situations, and that when we sense injustice, we become angry. And so it's really important to us for us to use our anger for good rather than just becoming angry, and to change things and become more positive. And so an example of that is what we do at Hallett, and that's a personal experience I have, so I can bring that in. So then I'm able to bring in something that I've learned in my personal life. So, and then my conclusion would be, let's get rid of this hierarchy of injustice. So as you can see, I've used things that I'm interested in and that I love to talk about to actually write something. And so that's what I want you all to be able to achieve, is that the ideas that you've come up with, the things that you love, you're able to express them in a cohesive way. So that's where I'm going to leave section 2 for now. Again, you're welcome to ask some questions a little bit later. Just letting you know, just to wrap it up, you definitely could have written about anything you liked. You could have fit into that in some capacity. My challenge for you after this masterclass is whatever plan you came up with or whatever ideas you generated, have a go at writing a piece using that plan. It's okay if it's not great. Start somewhere, have a go writing the piece. All right, so deep breath, we're almost there. I'm going to go over some section 3 things. Just a heads up, I don't currently tutor section 3, but I think that in some ways that's really beneficial because I can give you a bit of an overview, a bigger perspective, a fresh lens on some of the things that I find scary about section 3, even as someone who sat it a long time ago. All right, so in terms of what happens in section 3, it becomes a bit of a dreaded section because people think that it's all about science and that you have to know tons and tons of science. Yes, there are disciplines in there that you do need to know about in terms of what is expected. It tends to be first year university level. So chemistry, biology would be about first year level. Maths is probably more year 10 to 12, and physics is about year 12 as well. So just sort of for an indication. Whilst these are foundational in terms of the concepts that are sort of introduced in the stems and in the questions, the main things that you're going to be asked to do are those reasonings. So can you reason? Can you look at things logically? And so some of the questions that you might get given can involve diagrams. You might see some reaction pathways. You might have to apply and use formulas. They'll either be given to you or some of them will be required from memory, such as the things that you learnt in high school or learnt in first year uni. And just some of the frequently asked questions, I guess, that I hear a lot of are, do I need to have done a science-based degree, or do I have to have a science-based background? And the answer is definitely not. And sometimes this is a good thing because it means that you can look at the information given to you and reason through properly. But I guess if you don't have that kind of background, I would recommend seeing if you can find helpful resources to help you brush up on some of the concepts and topics that come up quite frequently in section 3. All right, and I'm going to approach this same thing again. So what we think our markers want versus what they actually want. So I think that there's this conception that they want you to know tons about physics, tons about chemistry and biology. They want you to come from a science and biomed background, and that will make you a fantastic doctor. But that's simply not the case. What they actually want is for you to be able to synthesize your information and reasoning and apply your reasoning skills. So it's, yes, whilst there is a basic level of prior knowledge required, that is all. Everything else from there on out is your ability to synthesize the text and information and then answer the questions using reasoning. I know that this section can seem super overwhelming and you can be like, oh my goodness, the struggle's real, and how do I even deal with this huge amount of information? So I just want to show you guys a few techniques to finish up with today. And it's basically just how do I cut through all the BS that is in the STEM, that's in the diagrams they give me, that's in the questions. And I like to ask myself 2 main questions. Firstly, from this STEM, from this diagram, from this text, what do I already know? What do I know? And then the second question is, what's missing, or what do I need to know / find out? They're your 2 things. If you follow those things, you're all good. I'm going to show you some examples of that. If you can get from part 1 to part 2, you're good. And that's it. I know that that's a bit of an oversimplification, but that's what I'd like to focus on today. So I have a couple of questions to try because I think that's the best way to do this. We're going to do the same thing as we did in section 1. I'll give you a few minutes to have a go. My recommendation would be to read the STEM and try and synthesize it, very similar to what we did in section 1, and then have a go at the questions, and then we'll briefly walk through them. So I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to do that. I'll open up the poll. I think I only have a poll that has an option for 3 questions. So for the third one, just put a random answer and we'll ignore that one. I'm just going to go over question 1 in the interest of time. And I think that that's the one that was more challenging. So the thing that I find most helpful, and this is definitely something you can get asked to do, is synthesize what is going on in the diagram and what is the relationship being displayed. A lot of the time you'll see a graph, so you'll have to work out what that relationship is. And so I like to look down this end here. We've got like a little lizard and a little mouse, and we're looking at a relationship between body mass and between metabolism. And so what you can see is that their body mass, there is a proportion from body mass to metabolism. But as they get bigger, what happens is that their body mass goes up, and it's going up. So we've got like 100 grams going up to 10 tons, but then the metabolism doesn't go up quite as much. So instead of going from 10 to the -7 to being as big as a jump from 100 grams to 10 tons, it only jumps to about 10 to the -4. So you want to put it into English because that's easier. So I would go, okay, as they get bigger, their metabolism does increase, but it doesn't increase as much as their size does, which means that there's a negative ratio of metabolic rate to body mass. So the ratio itself decreases as the body mass increases. So hopefully that makes sense. All right. What I want to do now, I know that this feels like a little bit of a rush, but I want to show you guys key techniques rather than explaining exactly how to do a question, because there'll be plenty of time to do that if you work through practice questions. I really want to show you some techniques on how to synthesize this kind of information. So I want you to read this. I know it's a little bit hefty, And then I want you to have a go working out how to read the diagram, because that's the first thing to do before you even see any questions at all. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes, and then I'll walk you through how to read the diagram just in case you're still a bit lost. Okay, so I know that this is a confusing diagram on the outset, and this is really typical of section 3, giving you something that looks really overwhelming and makes you feel like, I just can't do it, I'm just going to guess the answers, or I'm just going to semi-attempt things without properly working it out. The key to you doing well in section 3 is not, am I amazing at physics or am I amazing at chemistry? It's, do I take the time to correctly synthesize what's given to me, so then I'm just following the order of the steps. That's it. I'm not super amazing at any of these topics, but I did very well on section 3, and this was the greatest technique that helped me. So looking at this graph, what's going on? Basically, we're mixing together 3 gases. Simple as that. We've got methane, we've got an inert gas, which is nitrogen, and we've got oxygen. And with the right proportions of these gases, you'll have a reaction. So if you remember back to combustion reactions of chemistry, there's a combustion of methane in the presence of oxygen. And so this line here represents pure air. So down here we'll have pure air, which is 21% oxygen and therefore 79% of inert gas, being nitrogen. And if you followed the line all the way up, you'd have 0% of air left and 100% of it would be methane. So this line is showing you the mixture of methane with air. In terms of how to read sort of each of the axes, the horizontal axis is the concentration of methane. This vertical, this sort of angled axis here is how to read the concentration of the inert gas. So I sort of think of it as like the positive linear line, and then the linear line with the negative gradient. So all these lines going this way, these are your oxygen concentrations. So then I'm just going to look at one question, and just because of time, we'll work through it together, but you're welcome to screenshot these questions and give them a go later. What is the highest amount of nitrogen a mixture can contain while still being potentially flammable? So the information told you that between these 2 concentrations of methane, between 5% and 15%, you have flammability. And so the highest amount of nitrogen would be when you're using the lowest amount of methane. So you're using the most amount of air. So we'll read across here, 5% methane in the air. And then if you go across, sorry, I already snuck in the answer there, but that's okay. We find this point of intersection here on the air line. And then if you follow down the line here, that will tell you the percentage of oxygen, so 20% oxygen. But if you go up on the same gradient as what the nitrogen line is, then you'll see here that it's 75% of nitrogen. Wait, I didn't do that right. What did I forget? No, ignore the part that I said about following the airline, because we're talking about the highest amount of nitrogen possible. Sorry, I was thinking about this question here and following it along. But because we're thinking of the highest possible amount of nitrogen, you were given an additional bit of information about the oxygen, which is that it can technically still be flammable if the oxygen's as low as 12%. So just follow the line all the way down to 12%. Cool. All right. The final thing I'm going to do is just really quickly talk you through how to approach physics. I don't want you to stress too much about how to do a physics question at this stage, like how to work through every part. I want to point out the key things and what would trip me up usually. So usually what would trip me up would just be seeing this, because I hated physics and I didn't think I was very good at it in high school. So firstly, I want you to throw that mentality in the rubbish bin, because it doesn't help anybody and it's really negative. And when you have a negative mindset, it makes it very hard to achieve what you're trying to do. And so what I would do is have that fresh perspective going in, read the STEM, have a look at the diagram, ask yourself those same questions. What is going on? And in simplest term, we have a cannon on a cliff and it's shooting out a cannonball. And I'm sure all of you have seen that, if not in person, in a movie. And so we all know what that is. So make it relatable, make it understandable to you. Something else that you've seen a lot of is parabolas. And this here in the simplest form is a parabola. And we know a few things about a parabola, like it has a turning point. We know that the turning point, the gradient is 0. All these things you learned in math maths in high school. And so it makes it a lot more easy to deal with. Something that you might not have done if you didn't do certain types of mathematics in school is different formulas to do with velocity and acceleration, but all the information is given to you there. So it's those same two questions I brought up before. What do I know and what do I need to know? And so even though you might not know these equations off the top of your head, they're given to you. So you're good, you know them. So I don't want people getting thrown off or scared by these crazy equations here. They're giving them to you to help you out. I'm going to show you one example. So this question here, at what time does the ball reach maximum height? If I look at this here, well, at first when I read that, I just freak out because I'm like, I can't do this because I hate physics and I'm not good at it. But like I said, that's not a helpful mindset. So instead, a more helpful mindset is my parabola. The maximum I know is where I'm looking for, and I also know that the maximum has a gradient of 0, so that means it has a velocity of 0. And so I already can sub in velocity being 0. One other thing that we need to know, so that's already one of the things I know. Something else that I need to know is what the initial velocity was. I'm not going to go too much into detail of that, but if you don't know a lot about how to work out velocity when this is happening, have a look up velocity in terms of horizontal and vertical vectors, and you'll be just fine. It takes like about 5 minutes. Hop on YouTube and there'll be a few topics that you can look up there to help you out. There's a lot of things online to tell you what sort of core topics to learn or know about for section 3, and then if there are sort of any on those lists, that's the only time I'd actually go away and look up and try and learn topics for section 3. So now that you know what you'll be able to work out using vectors what this initial velocity is, which is 25 meters per second, and know that v here is going to be 0 because it's flat, which means that the acceleration also is going to be 0, then you can work out, the acceleration due to gravity will be 10, which they told you in the here, g is 10. Then you'll be able to sub it in and work out here that it's b, 2.5 seconds. So you'll be able to sum in each of these here, 0, 25, 10, and you'll work out at 10 for a, you'll work out that t is 2.5 seconds. So then you can work out that here at this point, at the maximum, it takes 2.5 seconds for the ball to get there. So at the start, it sounds really convoluted, complicated to try and work it out, but they're all principles that you've learned in the past, or they'll give you additional information to help you to get to that point. And that's what I think is most important about section 3, is asking yourself those things. What do I already know? What's already part of the picture that's given to me? What do I know from past concepts and things I've learned? And then what additional things do I need to find out to get to the answer? And if you can do that, it doesn't matter what the STEM is, it doesn't matter what you're given, you should be able to get to where you need to be. All right. So I want you all to take a deep breath and relax, because I know that we've gone over a lot. And just while we finish up, I'm going to quickly tell you a couple of things. Firstly, I'd like you to type in the chat, what was one thing that you learned or your biggest takeaway? Maybe it's a goal or something you're going to try this week. Maybe it's something you learned about the GAMSAT. Maybe it's a technique. So I want you to type that in the chat for me now. I also just wanted to thank you all for coming along and giving things a go and having a try at some of the activities. Thanks for putting in your answers and responses. And I hope that you found it helpful, and I hope that you're able to, in your preparations for when you sit the GAMSAT, to use some of these principles to springboard into your preparation over the next few months, if you're sitting it in September, or even beyond then if you're sitting it after September. So I'm going to hand it over to Eliza now, and she's going to tell you guys what we're doing next.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for all of that. I'm sure on behalf of everyone, we took so much away and so much value. And like I said, Sarah's totally that kind of person who goes above and beyond to explain everything so clearly. So like Joy saying in the chat, yes, thank you so much, Sarah. And also I'm just going to give you a bit of a 30-second break to recover before we go on to the sort of last little bit, which is a bit more of discussion. And all of our tutors are here today. And they're going to hop online in a sec, and you can ask them literally anything. They've all had very varied experiences, and I think will be super valuable for you guys to see. But just before we get into that and get a bit prepped, we do run a ton of events, and they're completely always requested by our students. The reason why we're doing this GAMSAT 101 is totally because we had so many students in our open Facebook group tell us they wanted it. So what I'm going to do is in the chat, just link you to the important links for that. The first one is the Facebook group that you should be a part of, just because that's where we put all of our free resources. And the second is this interactive calendar, which I've got a screenshot on the screen. That just outlines all of the GAMSAT and Med interview events that we've got coming up in the month, so you don't miss a beat. So with that, we're going to transition it to our first sort of in the next 10 minutes. If we hop onto the next slide, I'd love to sort of introduce you to Molly, who is one of our Hallett alumni, both on our Impact mission overseas, but also one of our GAMSAT students from this May. We call her the guinea pig because unfortunately she was one of the students who had to sit the first online GAMSAT. And we thought it was super valuable to have Molly on because she sat the GAMSAT offline and online. And obviously right now we don't exactly know if it's going to be online again, most likely will be. And that has obviously meant a big difference in sort of preparing for the GAMSAT. And Molly did super well in her section, well in 1 and 2, improved so much, and I think it was so valuable to have her on here just to give you a 10-minute breakdown of how actually studying and doing that exam online has been different. So take it away, Molly.
Fabulous. Thank you for the introduction, Liz. It's super great to be here today, and I am really excited to be sharing my thoughts and experience from sitting the online GAMSAT in May. So if you could just please go to the next slide. Thank you. So I just thought I might break it down into the good, the bad, and the downright ugly or stressful. So contrary to popular belief, the online GAMSAT isn't actually too bad. I actually had a pretty enjoyable experience, and I wanted to tell you why. I do have a few reservations, but I will touch briefly on those in a second. So as someone who's sat the offline GAMSAT previously, I did find the online GAMSAT a little bit of a learning curve and difficult to adapt to initially. I do think that this is, however, because I had certain strategies for the traditional pen and paper GAMSAT that I essentially had to unlearn to an extent for the online GAMSAT, which I found rather challenging. That being said, I didn't actually mind the overall online GAMSAT, and I personally had a very smooth process. So the GAMSAT is a psychometric test, and this does not change whether it occurs offline or online. Essentially, it's designed to measure your capability for a role by testing your ability to handle time pressures, think analytically and critically in a problem-solving scenario, as well as your ability to express logical yet complex ideas in a coherent fashion. For any normal sitting, the offline GAMSAT, is typically a full day extravaganza. The exam encompasses 5.5 hours of actual testing. With registrations and waiting times, you end up quite literally being there for approximately 7 to 8 hours. So the good thing is that the online GAMSAT was in 2 separate 2-hour sessions across 2 weeks, which made it seem much more manageable and a lot less daunting. To me, the online GAMSAT did feel stressful, but for the wrong reasons. You might be wondering how the GAMSAT is invigilated if the entire exam is held online. ASA uses a company called ProctorU, and this is essentially an online invigilator. You're assigned a random proctor who watches you and your screen throughout the entire test. Over the testing period, I did hear my fair share of horror stories from people who had waited up to, say, an hour and a half to be connected to that proctor. And I think it definitely becomes a mental game not to psych yourself out just sitting there waiting. So I guess ProctorU and the fear of technical issues was a bit of a stress inducer in the lead up to the online GAMSAT. I can't tell you how many times my friend and I called each other and debated changing our times for the proctoring session. We were really, really worried that if we chose to sit on the last day and our tech did manage to screw up, we would be in a really, really bad position. However, just wanted to bust that myth. If your tech did manage to fail, ASA did have your back, and they were pretty lenient on offering a resit even after the official testing period had concluded. So in terms of the actual test day, I was actually pretty fortunate to get through my proctor checks rather quickly and soon found myself staring at the start window ready to begin. It's definitely a strange feeling for sure, sitting such a high stakes exam completely alone with a computer screen. Usually you're sitting in like a big testing hall with like thousands of other candidates next to you. But once I got over this kind of mental roadblock, I was feeling ready to tackle the GAMSAT. I did find the actual online interface quite easy to navigate. There were clear instructions and it was very user-friendly. This year, ACER had reduced the number of questions but increased the time allocated to each question. I believe that this was to account for scrolling, clicking, internet lags, and the difficulty of reading off a screen. I would just say that the extra time was definitely very helpful. That being said, the GAMSAT is always a test of speed and it pays to be as fast and accurate as possible, whether you sit it online or offline. So one good thing about the online exam is that there is no time wasted shading in bubbles, which is probably my biggest bias. The questions appear side by side next to the passage of the text on your left. So this means that there's a very small chance of you accidentally shading in the answers to the wrong question, which was definitely a problem with the offline GAMSAT. In the offline GAMSAT, you usually get given a booklet plus your separate answer sheet. And depending on how you go through the test, you would be required to either shade each answer as you go or leave shading until the very end. And the online GAMSAT definitely minimize any chance of error transferring these. I know at the very end, if you're the type to kind of circle directly on the answer booklet and then transfer all your answers at the very end, this was kind of a lot less stressful trying to catch up. Like with 5 minutes to go. Also, section 2 was typed instead of handwritten. I definitely found this better as I personally find it a lot faster to type. So I was able to get out 2 essays very quickly. There's no copy paste function, but it is actually really easy to delete and edit your writing. Another thing was being able to do it in the comfort of your own home. I acknowledge that this might not be the case for everyone, but I personally enjoyed not having to queue in a line for hours, surrounded by, the nervous energy of other people around you. So all in all, I felt that ACER gave some and they took some with this online exam. Section 2, I definitely found a lot better, but section 1 and section 3 was definitely a bit of a challenge without the ability to annotate. It was difficult to initially adapt, but after some practice getting used to the online system, I found myself enjoying the entire process a lot. So some of the main differences and challenges to overcome with the online GAMSAT, I think, was definitely the fact that it was split into 2 sessions. So that was probably the biggest difference. Session 1 for section 1 and 2, and then another session for purely section 3 a week later. In addition to this, the amount of questions was approximately half the normal amount. So I guess make of that what you will. So some people will thrive in a shorter exam and others prefer a longer one. So this was definitely the biggest change to the online GAMSAT. Sorry, to the offline GAMSAT sitting. For those of you who don't know, it's pretty much 5.5 hours of back-to-back testing, which is definitely a real test of endurance as well. I think for me personally, the biggest challenge was losing the ability to annotate your exam booklet. In a typical session, the exam booklet is all yours. No one else looks at it. If you wanted to, you were able to scribble all over it, all over the text, into the margins, etc. It was definitely challenging not being able to underline, circle, especially for section 1 and section 3. So in the lead up to the original March GAMSAT, I had printed out the booklets and practiced taking notes and annotating the stems. I had a complete system in place, complete with little symbols and annotations, and it was working very well for me. So when I found out that we would be required to read a screen, I immediately felt like I had wasted all this time. I mean, it really did kind of shake me. But I quickly realized that it was not all in vain. I realized that I was working very well, still synthesizing the information. I just had to mentally adapt to being able to read things off a screen rather than relying on physically writing things down. Another challenge, I guess, to kind of build off that one was reading text on a screen for long periods of time. This was really, really draining on the eyes. It's definitely a lot easier to lose focus when you're staring at a screen. I'm actually the type who's adamant about printing things out, and I know I immediately zone out when looking at a screen versus looking at kind of hard copy physical paper. Thanks, I'm just gonna bit of a sniffle this morning. I had to really push myself to change my mentality and approach. I hope it's not COVID, just full disclaimer here. Okay, moving along. I had to really push myself to change my mentality and approach to viewing the text on a screen. I'm so sorry, guys. Lucky for us, the GAMSAT texts are really very interesting. So no matter if it's online or offline, I feel that ACER chooses texts that are all very complex and thought-provoking. So as long as you're actively reading and engaging with the text, I feel like you'll be in very good stead. One good thing also was having a timer that you could always glance towards. This was in the top right-hand corner of the screen, and that's very different to how you would normally sit an exam where you kind of have to have that analog clock. So in a physical exam, you're always very pressed for time, and the absolute last thing you want to do is to be doing mental maths, trying to figure out what, like, say, 11:42 a.m. minus 11:19 a.m. is to find out how many minutes have elapsed and how many minutes you have left, etc. So how did I prepare for the offline GAMSAT versus the online GAMSAT? Once it was confirmed that the GAMSAT was proceeding as an online exam, I had a long, hard think about what it meant for my strategies. GAMSAT is a very personal and holistic experience. What works for me might not necessarily work for someone else. And realistically, I knew that some of my strategies would require a bit of an overhaul. I couldn't physically annotate or write things down on the text, but I could still use the similar thought processes that I had ready to go. I also acknowledged that I had 2 pieces of paper for me per session, which would prove to be very invaluable. To help myself process this change, I wrote down a list of my strengths and weaknesses, as well as how these had changed in the online exam. Surprisingly, I realized that the core of my strategies did not actually change. I think that just having that faith in myself and all the work that I had done thus far was so helpful in maintaining my confidence and best self when preparing for that online GAMSAT. I also made sure to replicate the online exam testing conditions as early as possible. For the online GAMSAT, you're allowed 2 blank double-sided pieces of paper per session. What I would do was fold the piece of paper in half vertically to give myself a kind of like mental margin down the middle, then mentally allocate sections of the paper to certain questions. I'm definitely a bit of a messy note taker, so this helped me keep my notes and working out a lot more clearer. I also partitioned off a section of my piece of paper that was reserved solely for noting down the questions that I was unsure about. And I made it very clear to myself that I, under no circumstances, would kind of like go into that, go across the margin and into that section. So I guess this just is a story about making sure to establish what works for you very early on. Everyone has a different way of taking notes and synthesizing information. Make sure you work out what works best for you, then stick to this. I let myself get comfortable with the testing format online, and then I worked on improving my speed. I definitely had a plan going in. This was to search for the short, sweet stems that I was confident in. Where I would normally like flick through the physical question booklet for the online exam, I just had to like quickly click through the questions until I found something that I was like, oh yeah, I like the look of this. And then I started there. Yeah, I would 100% recommend practicing with the interface as soon as possible. I know that the September GAMSAT is still kind of up in the air about whether it will be held online or offline, but regardless, definitely get used to either using printouts or only reading PDF copies of the questions and stems. Then practice your strategies as early on as possible, just so that they become second nature. In the actual exam, I wasn't actually like thinking about what strategies to use. They had just become ingrained from practice. But yeah, I would probably recommend using mind maps in your practice. They're honestly so invaluable. They help like connect and synthesize the ideas for you. I started by practicing these on paper, and then I found out that I was actually able to slowly kind of shortcut my way around this to the point where I was just like thinking about it in my head, and that was enough for me. But yes, so I guess on test day, it's definitely about getting into the right mindset. I left a sticky note on my door, and what I wrote on it was, leave your assumptions here. So you can do the GAMSAT from the comfort of your own home, and essentially you can like put in place like little kind of tips and tricks and little quotes to motivate yourself on the day. But yeah, those are my general thoughts. I will probably pass over now to Eliza, who will run the Q&A. Lol. You can ask her why it's called the Q&A. If you have any other questions about the online GAMSAT, please feel free to ask at any time. I do have some strategies, but I don't think we have that much time to go over them right now. But yeah, feel free to chuck a message or unmute your mics to ask. Other than that, thank you, Liz.
Cool, thanks Molly. And I think she does have some terrific actual strategies for exam day, which we'll keep for a later event when it's actually closer to the exam. But for now, I hope I'm not mute again. Okay, I'm not. For now, we're going to a Q and lol. The whole point of a Q and lol, and we don't call it a Q&A because we're so honest, I think, with our answers. They're going to, like, you know, all of our tutors tell the honest story. Everyone's had a different GAMSAT experience. And so from left to right, I'm going to quickly introduce everyone. And whilst I'm doing that, if you have any questions for any specific tutors or just general ones, pop them in the chat and we'll try our best to get through them in the next sort of 15 or so minutes. But I think it's super valuable to actually get, you know, people's real life experience from the exam. So from left to right, obviously you've already met Sarah, who is our head of GAMSAT and does section 1, 2, and is our only med student from Monash represented here. We have Gabby, who's also a section 1, 2 tutor. If you give a wave, Gabs, that'd be awesome. She's doing her MD1 at Melbourne and is also a Hallett alumni from our most recent cohort over into the Philippines. Molly, who you've also just met, is interestingly also one of our, like I said, Hallett alumni from the very first winter cohort, and also went through the GAMSAT through our May season just then and is now tutoring for the next season because she did so incredibly well. Funny story, actually, I'm going to talk about Mish and Molly. Molly and Mish went on the same volunteer mission over in the Philippines, and Molly was the only vegetarian on our trip. And on the first day, Mish turns around to Molly and offers her a piece of chicken, and Molly said, "I'm the only vegetarian here." So that's the funniest thing that I think I've ever remembered about the two. Mish, if you give a wave, Mish, he's one of our section 3 tutors, is terrific in the bio space, and is also doing his MD1 at Melbourne. Karim is our section 3 tutor, terrific also in the bio space, and is an MD1 at Uni Melb, as well as Keely, who's also an MD1 at Uni Melb this year, and is gun at everything chemistry. So if we don't have any questions to start off with, I might just kick off just trying to get as much out of our tutors as possible. We might go from right to left this time, starting with Keely. But what is one thing that, let's start Keely, that you didn't know about the GAMSAT going in the first time, given that most people sitting here are first time sitters, that you actually wish you knew?
Okay, thanks, Liz. So for me going my first attempt, I knew like virtually nothing. I signed up on like the last day of late entries. So as much as I knew I wanted to sit the GAMSAT, it was something that was not in my mind space until like a few weeks beforehand. So again, I didn't really know much about the structure. I knew vaguely how many questions were in each section, but I hadn't really like comprehended how much time I would have, and to, you know, how to work through the pace of the exams. And it's going all right, and then all of a sudden realize I'd have 20 questions left and like less than 10 minutes. So I think for me it was really being familiar with the structure of the exam, and I didn't really know much about how to time or how to pace myself. So that's something I would really suggest you get ahead of, because even without the content, the pacing alone is something that can make a big difference in your performance.
I guess I'll go. Yep. So as opposed to Keely, my first time sitting, I thought I knew what it would be like. I thought I'd be pretty decent. I thought I'd, know the structure, know the content that I need to know. I thought it was going to be all right. What I didn't realize was that it was going to be such a tiring day. I found it so exhausting. As I got through section 1, I was like, all right, now I have to write 2 essays. Got through section 2. We had an hour break, and I was like, am I really about to sit a 3-hour section 3, full science, really complicated things? I have to analyze graphs. I have to analyze all this sort of content. And yeah, it was really, really tiring. So definitely try to mentally prepare for that. What I wish I'd done beforehand is actually sit full exam days, sort of like the mock exams that we offer at Hallett. Casual just referencing. But yeah, I just wish I'd practiced it a little bit more in terms of how tiring it was.
Yeah, I think kind of going off what Karim said, I think also the idea of like how tiring that whole day was something that I wasn't familiar with as well. Like, I think everyone can kind of have an idea about the questions that they're going to provide, or the essay topics, or the poem kind of structure or wording or whatnot that they kind of test you on. But the whole day itself is essentially like a marathon, in that you kind of have to go into it expecting to be kind of drained all throughout, even though you do have breaks, like Karim mentioned. They kind of just don't do too much in terms of helping refresh you. So I think it's important to go into it with some expectation that you will be quite drained amidst all the chaos of it all, especially if you are going into like an online exam which you haven't felt comfortable with previously. So that's probably my advice.
Okay, I guess I'm next. So I agree with everything that everyone has said so far. GAMSAT is definitely a huge mental challenge, and I think every one of you should remember to think at the very end of it, once you leave that final exam testing hall, or you close all your windows and exit the proctor session, that like the reality of what you have just achieved. And I think full credit to you guys. In terms of what I did not know going in and what I wish I knew, was that this is more specific to section 2, but I was actually under the impression that I had to write like a full kind of year 12 style essay. And then I quickly realized that this is definitely not the case. And I feel like if you do kind of box yourself into that structure, it's probably more unlikely that you will kind of perform as well as you would hope. So I quickly realized that they pretty much essentially want to see yourself in that essay. So as long as they can see your opinions and your ideas, that's exactly what they want from a section 2 essay. Other than that, I just wanted to say, Curly, when she was saying how she registered late, I think maybe, I was the exact same. I actually copped the $100 late registration fee just because I was so unorganized going in. So please, if anything, learn from that and make sure that you actually read the dates so that you don't cop that $600 GAMSAT fee.
Okay, so for me, I think the biggest mistake I made is I thought it was more of a content exam. And the first time I sat it, I spent so much time learning content for both section 1 and section 3, and it was such a waste of time. It didn't help me at all. And if anything, just made me stress out more, because I realized I knew nothing about physics because I hadn't done it since like year 8 or something. So that was the biggest thing for me. And I highly recommend, if you're in the same boat, stop learning content and just work on strategy. And make a solid game plan to how you're going to approach each section going into the GAMSAT. And also look after yourself. Make sure that you don't burn out before the GAMSAT, because that's the worst thing you can do for yourself and your performance. So just pace yourself.
Awesome. Yes, definitely echo what Molly said in terms of make sure that you're organized about the little things like dates. I tell my students that if they're not good at organizing dates, they can get me to sign up for them and they can pay me the extra $100 for the late fee. I'd rather it go to me than ASA. So you're welcome to do that, just a recommendation. But in terms of when I went into the GAMSAT, I guess I was one of the, I say lucky, but it wasn't really lucky. I did work hard and I knew what I was doing, but lucky ones in terms of I only had to sit it once. And I think that the biggest thing that I wish I'd be better at was just believing in myself. I did what I had to do to prepare, and it's the things that I've shared with you guys today. I had techniques and I understood the point of the exam from the outset, and I still went in feeling like I wasn't good enough and I didn't know enough. And I listened, so it was back when I sat it was the long day and it was written, and so I remember going to the lunch break after section 2 and hearing what everyone wrote about and feeling so inadequate, and like I'd written something really dumb and I was like, I've just blown it, and I just felt so stupid. But actually they'd all written about the same thing, and what I didn't know at the time was that I was the one who'd done better because I wrote about something different. And so I guess just believing in yourself. If you've prepared and if you are passionate about this, which if you're coming along to things like this and you're finding out you probably are, then trusting that on the day, whatever you bring to the table, you're bringing yourself, you're bringing your best, you're bringing enough, and you'll get there eventually. And some people do have to sit it multiple times and it sucks, but it's definitely worth it, and it's worth getting where you want to go. And I love what I do every day. I love medical school. I love medicine. And if that's you, and if that sounds like you, I just wish that I'd had a little bit more confidence. It would have saved me a lot of tears and a lot of heartache that were not necessary. And I think everyone here can relate to that struggle of feeling like I'm never going to make it. And you can. And I wasn't the smartest in my cohort. I wasn't the one that everyone expected would automatically get in. It was about understanding what the exam was about and trusting that I knew how to do it. And yeah, I want everyone to feel like that.
Note to self, unmute. Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. I think great point that Sarah put on in terms of some people do have to sit it twice. And I think there are a few tutors who have sat it twice. Hand up if you have. There you go. So, and they've all ended up with incredible scores, and that persistence definitely does show in the end of the day. I guess if we don't have any other questions from the audience, we'll end with one question for everyone, going around back from Keely over to Sarah again. But okay, we do have a question. Do you guys have any tips that have worked for you and how to be motivated to do the reading preparation for section 1-2? So I guess the three girls. I found that I really struggle doing this regularly. Also, another quick question, where did you guys take a break? Was it like an oval or a big enough space to walk? Are you able to leave the venue or go for a bite or anything? Maybe that last bit for Molly and then the first bit for the two girls.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing to note is that whole concept of having to read widely is a little bit BS. I don't think you do have to do that. And if you are going to read widely, at least read things that you enjoy. Don't bother reading really dry material or things that you were really struggling with or that you don't find interesting, because you're probably not going to write about it. And what's the chances that that exact text is going to come up in section 1? Probably pretty low. So yeah, I just think reading different styles of poems and stuff may be worth your time, but don't spend too much time on it. Just focus on reading things that you like. But with the second part of the question, I will note when it was in person, ours was at Caulfield Racecourse in Melbourne, and I went for a run in the break around the course. So yeah, you could, yeah, I had way too much energy, so that's what I did.
Pretty sure I had a nap. I would just like add one more part to that. I think, and we mentioned it before as well, in terms of no need to go out and read all these books or be up to date with newspapers or anything. And Gabby just reiterated that perfectly. So you've heard it from both of us, definitely not necessary. But another part of this question is really important and valid, which is being motivated to prepare, being motivated to do those things that you're like, this will help me with my GAMSAT preparation, whether it's writing an essay, whether it's doing those section 3 questions. It doesn't matter what it is. It can be really hard to be motivated. And 2 things I find really helpful. One of them is reminding myself of like the whole point. Why am I doing it? So make sure that you have like, you know what your true motivation is. So is it like seeing yourself? And I used to like see myself as a doctor, which might sound egotistical and stupid, but that worked for me. So whatever works for you, do what works for you. Write it down, write a mantra, anything that works. The other thing I'd say is having other people to be accountable to. You can make it fun, you can make it interesting, whether it's a study group, whether it's once a week, you're accountable and tell them what you've done that week. Whatever it is, have a way to motivate yourself, because it can be a bit like a marathon and literally like trying to get to the end. So that would probably be the other part of the question. And I'm just going to hand it over to Molly to finish off your question.
Thanks, Sarah. Totally agree with what the girls have said so far. Another thing I would just add for section 2 and section 1 preparation, probably section 2 more so, is to see if you can find someone else to do it with. I think having the ability to discuss ideas as well as how you got to a certain answer for section 1 is really helpful and invaluable. You could probably find some of your friends who might also be sitting the GAMSAT who have similar interests to you, and then you can just spend an afternoon talking about those interests, and then you'll quickly find that you come up with ideas and you bounce off each other, and then you can kind of kind of develop those ideas a bit further to the point where you can turn it into a good piece of writing. In terms of the second part of that question, I did my physical offline GAMSAT at Caulfield Racecourse. So that's in Melbourne. If you guys are based here, there is a big oval that the racehorses do use. And I guess you could be like Gabby and go for a run around, but there's definitely a lot of space around for you to go for a walk. If you're at Caulfield, there's a train station, and across the train station, there's like a strip of stores that you can purchase food at. Other than that, yeah, definitely a lot of space for you guys to just walk around, decompress a bit, and get ready for section 3. Yeah, I think we might head on to, there are a few more questions if Liz maybe wanted to moderate them.
Awesome. Let's just go like one word, one quick fire across from Keely back to Sarah. How long did it take you guys spend preparing for the whole GAMSAT? Go Keely.
As I said before, first time I did like no prep, like a week maybe. Second attempt, I said probably about a month, but I sat the March one. So that was like with no uni, no other pressures, kind of spending not every day, but a few days each week. What's an approx? Oh, damn it! Oh no.
What's an approx hour per like week situation?
Oh, good question. 12 maybe hours a week. But that was like having done like no prep, doing a bit of reading sometimes, not too much, but practicing some questions and revising physics, because I, again, like Gabby said, hadn't done that since like year 8. So that was like a little bit of an area for me as well.
Yeah, for me personally, I started prepping for the GAMSAT in January. So I spent January and February just preparing. And I think it has nothing to do with how early you start. It's more to do with how consistent you are and like focusing on your weak areas. So I probably did about 12 hours as well, like nothing overly crazy. You know, I had friends who did way more hours and like didn't score as well because they were like not reflecting on their work and they weren't, you know, focusing on their weak areas.
Yeah, I probably would say the same in the sense that, like what Corinne mentioned, like quality over quantity in terms of how you prepare for the GAMSAT is important. If you are sitting in March, for example, like you don't want to be slaving away the whole holidays kind of figuring out what you're wrong at or like what you're struggling with, but just kind of doing what you can and kind of just familiarizing yourself with the type of questions that they do provide is something that I would probably hold key. So probably around 10 to 15 hours per week is something that I'd aim for.
Yeah, just echoing what everyone has said so far, I would agree. On average, probably most students would say that 10 to 12 hours per week is probably a kind of benchmark. I do think, however, though, that the whole kind of studying experience is very personal. So it really, really depends on you guys. And I think we just have to remember as well to not be too hard on yourself if you can't say like you're trying to aim for 12 hours a week, and if you can't make it, then it's okay. I think, yeah, as people have said, quality over quantity is much more important. And just making sure that you're practicing a bit of reflection afterwards is probably key. In terms of me personally, so I started in February for the March one, and then this took a bit of a back burner once we found out that the GAMSAT was going to be postponed. And I think I might have picked it up again back in May, so probably a bit over a month to go. But yeah, as I mentioned, very personal, and we're more than happy to have a discussion with you guys personally to work out something that would suit you guys best.
I think for me, I set it in March, and I was working a full-time job over the holidays as well. So each week was pretty varied, but I'd do anywhere between 5 and 10 hours a week, I'd say. Just really depended on what was going on in my schedule.
Yeah, I'm just going to keep it short and sweet. I spent about 1.5 months preparing, and I had a rule that I wouldn't average more than 2 hours per day, which meant like over a 7-day week, it would be no more than 14 hours, but definitely had weeks I did much less. If you want to know a little bit more about putting together a study schedule or like ways to construct preparing, we ran a strategies masterclass for the May sitting, and I ran through some ways to construct a study timetable and some different templates on there. So there's links for that up on our pages, so go have a look for those, or you can email us if you can't find them. and that might be a good place to help you start constructing that.
Awesome. And I think we're going to end on just Angela's question. She asked, I know Sarah just touched on it, how would you recommend setting up a study schedule or prepping for the GAMSAT? I'm going to make an iteration onto that question, going around quickfire again, Keely to Sarah. We're not very good at quickfire, by the way. What is the number one thing you would take away to do? Like, what's the first step now if you were a first-time sitter in the GAMSAT? What is the first thing you're going to go and do for your study?
Okay, so I'm going to focus a bit on section 3 because that's what I like, and I really dislike section 1 and 2. The first thing, I would get familiar with the types of questions. GAMSAT are very predictable with the types of questions. They will always give you new content, and it'll be some abstract thing you've never even heard of, or something that seems really simple, but they give you some kind of modification to it, which makes it seem really absurd. But I get familiar with the question types and focus on working through questions. And like Sarah, I think was speaking earlier before in the workshop, think about what you do know and what you don't know. And the things that you don't know, or if it's something very niche, I wouldn't worry about it. If it's something that's like, oh, well, this keeps coming up in lots of kinds of questions, then after having attempted it, I would go away and have a little bit of a review of it.
Yep, I'd probably say pretty much the same thing. I think the biggest thing is just get started, try different questions, see how you go with them. The only other thing is, as a first-time sitter, focus on what you're not good at, because you have so much time to prepare for the GAMSAT, so spend that period focusing on what you're not good at.
Yeah, I think even if you don't go ahead and attempt questions, or you don't have like a big resource bank like provided to you, even just like looking at basic graphs, tables, and trying to unpack what information they're like providing to you can be a good skill to kind of learn, especially because a lot of diagrams that GAMSAT provides can be quite difficult to interpret. So thinking of it as skills that you can kind of utilize when you are sitting it, and trying to prepare for that instead can also be another way of kind of starting off.
Yep, great. So I would probably recommend, as a first-time sitter, please go read the information booklets. There is a lot of invaluable information contained in that, like, I think it was like 30 pages maybe. It's quite long, but definitely please read every single word and line of text. In terms of maybe section 2 in particular, I would say jump straight into looking at your quotes and trying to come up with ideas. I think mind maps are probably the best way to go, and just making sure that you can like link your ideas and create that depth of discussion as well.
Maybe I will keep it short with just one quote, but I need to get it right. Failing to plan is planning to fail. There we go. So plan.
That's literally the quote I was going to use.
Oh no.
What she said. Yeah. I was going to give you 2 words: familiarize and practice. So what the section 3 guys said about like get familiar with what the content looks like and practice, particularly section 2, start writing. Just write, look at how you're going. If it looks terrible, keep prepared. Wow, my words are just gone by the end of these 3 hours. But keep improving from that. So just get going.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Em, Joy, and Angela, for those questions. We're going to hop over to the last slide and just wrap this up. Thank you so much for everyone for attending today. This is very much the kickoff, the first sort of thing we do for first-time sitters every GAMSAT season. If you want to know what's next, we, like I said, run a host of free things just to help students get prepared, because that's truly what all our tutors are about. So if you just check that calendar, you'll see that the next thing coming up is a mini mock exam, and I'll post that link in the chat now if you want a short link to that. But also just make sure you like the Right Hella to Health Facebook page, because there's actually 2, so that you can stay up to date with all sort of when new things are coming out. And hopefully we'll see you at the next mock exams, which were, by the way, apparently the most valuable resource from the May students that we've just had this time around. So we'll hope to see you all there. Have a good day, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.